All right, welcome back. Happy Monday. I hope we had a great weekend. Is this a question for me?
Oh, no, sorry, I just kind of.
Okay. All right. Today we talk about weighted voting. Second day, last day on weighted voting. Last class we talked about this thing called the Shapley-Shubik. You guys remember the stuff with the markers up here and which player is pivotal? So today we're going to talk about a completely different way to talk about who's the most important or which members of a weighted voting committee are important. And this will be the end of our weighted voting stuff. Over the next two classes, we'll talk about cryptography, and then it will be here before you know it. But test number 1 is October the 8th, okay? October 8th. It is coming soon. The other thing I want to point to is that on September 24th, which is this Wednesday, the voting project is due. Many of you have already submitted it. I've got graded projects over here that I'll hand back in a few minutes today. But if you finish the project already, throw it in the folders for me. If not, it is due September 24th, Wednesday. It is possible to turn the project in late, but lateness penalties start accruing as soon as you are late. So better to turn it in on time, not have those penalties come in. But if you have to have some lateness penalties, make sure you turn it in at some point, right? Something is better than a 0 there. Okay. Oh, one other thing. Everybody got this extra credit election thing from last week? Yes? I gave out this piece of paper? Yes? Okay, so I just wanted to let you know, maybe you got this over the weekend too. Anybody get one of these over the weekend? No? Yes, Monica? Yeah? Yes, Mary Ellen got this over the weekend. So we talked about how to make sure that you are registered in time for this election in early November. There are a bunch of different ways, but in particular, here's a little thing that one of you can fill in and mail. The alternative is to print this from the web page and then put it in the mail. Either way is fine. And also, remember I had mentioned that there were 4 ballot questions, 4 yes or no questions that all of us here in Massachusetts will be asked to vote on. And inside of here, it has the statements of each of the questions and a short argument in favor of the proposal and a short argument against the proposal. And so you spend 5 minutes reading and you make an informed choice before you get to the ballot boxes on November 4, okay? I'm gonna pass this around. You don't need to read it right now. All this information is available on this website, but I just wanted to let you know that these things are also floating around if you prefer paper copies to internet stuff. Okay, so at the top of page 40, let's go ahead and, well, we'll just take a look at number 1 real quick here. It says there are URLs to 2 videos on weighted voting systems. One of them is about the Shapley-Shubik, which we did last class. The other one is about bonds-off, which we'll do this class. It is the same techniques that we're talking about here, but somebody else explaining it with a slightly different take. So if you want to hear somebody else's ideas on these 2 methods, you can check out one or both of those videos. All right, both well done. Okay, let's start with Ricky for number 2. Thank you. Number 3, Tony. Thank you. So in this class, there is no ordering involved. Last class, we had the 3 people with the markers. We assumed that they were all going to be in favor. What was the motion we were voting on? Something about spring break, like making it 3 weeks long. Right. So everybody was going to be in favor of that. It was just a matter of who was the most important person, depending on the order that they were in. There's no ordering here. All we're going to do is say we've got 3 people and they all want to say yes to something, but there's not an order. They're not putting their markers into the fishbowl in an order. Everything is unordered. Winning coalition, Monica? Thank you. And Jackie, critical players. Okay, so that definition is the most important one for the day, and we're going to come back to it once we have some numbers to actually play with. Christopher, can you read 4? Okay, so standard notation, remember, has some square brackets. What do we put first inside the brackets? 101, which is called the quota. So quota goes first. And there's a symbol we always put. Colon is good. And then we're going to list the weights in what kind of order? Largest to smallest. So the first one is 99, 98, and then finally 3. So there it is in our standard notation. Okay, let's just call them, oh, they have names, red and blue and green. Which one is the most powerful? Red, and the next, and then a distant third is green, right? We agree? Okay, so let's see how this plays out as we start filling in, what's that? For Green Party, right. They have hardly any votes at all, only 3. It's like a pittance compared to the other 2 parties. All right, well, let's see what happens. So what we're going to first fill in this first column are the winning coalitions. So let's look at these one at a time. Is there any single player that has enough votes to pass the motion? No. So there are no single player winning coalitions. Are there any pairs of players that have enough to pass the vote? There are. And so we're going to start listing these guys. I'm going to call them, just like we normally do, P1 and P2 and P3. And we're going to list all of the winning pairs of people. So for example, P1 and P2, do they have enough votes to pass something? Sure they do, by a wide margin. So we'll list P1, comma, P2. That is a winning coalition. You guys have another black line going here, right? All right. Let's look at another pair. P1 with P3, did they have enough? They do, right? You don't need to have enough by a lot. You just need enough. 99 and 3 is 102. That's enough. So P1 with P3 is good. Are there any other pairs that we haven't listed? P2 and P3. Look at their votes. Do they have enough to win, P2 and P3? They do, just barely, right? Equaling the quota is a win. So that means that P2 and P3 also form a winning coalition. That's all the pairs of coalitions. And then finally, if they all 3 vote yes together, is that enough? Yeah. Plenty. So that's the last row, P1, P2, and P3. It wants to erase like everything. I just want P3. Okay. All right. Next column, it says, well, what's the weight? Let's just add these numbers up and fill them in the second column. So if P1 and P2 are both in favor, how much is their combined weight? So this is 99 plus 98, 197, right? We're just adding them up. P1 with P3, 102 is good. P2 with P3, adding up these guys, 101, that just barely made it, but that was fine. And then all 3 numbers added up together, 200. Okay, so this is pretty straightforward so far. But filling in this last column is the tough part, is finding the critical players in each of these winning coalitions. So Jackie, can you read that definition again? Critical player. Okay, so let's focus on, in the first row, player P1. If P1 decided to bail out and say, you know what, I'm not in favor of this anymore, and they disappeared, would the rest of the coalition, which is just that single person, have enough votes to win? No, which means that P1 was pretty darn important in this coalition, and we call them critical. So P1, it is the same. So but P1 is critical. Everyone agree? If P1 disappears, we lose. And then we play the same game and say, okay, well, what about P2? Is P2 really important? So we'll temporarily cross them off and say, with what's left, is there enough votes to pass the motion? No. So P2 is also critical. So both of them are critical in that case. And then we play the same game. What's that? All right, so let's see if we agree with Sam. Sam says that it's the same for all of these pairs. If we get rid of P1 in this next row, is there enough left to pass? No, so P1 is really critical. And if we got rid of P3 instead, is there enough left over? If we no, all right. So both of them are critical. Would you guys agree that both P2 and P3 are critical in this next pair? Okay. So we got both critical here, P1, P3, and then P2, P3 critical there. And now we get to the last one. We have to go just one player at a time. So let's just first focus on P1. Cover him with your hand if you want to. If P1 disappears, does that coalition still have enough votes to pass the motion? Yes, which means P1 wasn't all that important in this case, right? So P1 isn't critical. And then we bring them back. And then we look at P2, and you put your hand over them and temporarily cross them off. Without P2, is this coalition still winning? It is. So P2 wasn't all that important. It's a real common sticking point here is that sometimes folks, when they're first doing this, they'll cross P1 off and they'll say, okay, not critical. And then they'll also cross off P2. You don't get to keep crossing people off. It's a one at a time, and then you bring them back, okay? And then the last one, P3. Without P3, are we still winning? We are. So P3 is not critical there. And so, in fact, no single person is all that important in the last coalition. Okay, now let's count how many times each player was critical. How many times was P1 critical? Twice, right? How about P2? Twice. And P3? Twice. So in terms of power, what do you think about the relationship of power between these three people? Sure seems equal, right? Each of them was really important, critical, twice. And so in a very real sense, all three of these players have exactly the same weight, which is really counterintuitive because we felt like the poor Green Party had hardly anything to do with these motions, had only 3 votes compared to 98 and 99. But it turns out that they're all kind of equal. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's true for any of these pairs. If you have 2 people opposed, then the third person is going to swing it one way or the other. It doesn't matter whether that third person is the apparently powerful red party or the apparently puny green party. They're going to be the decider. Good. Okay, so just like before, we're going to do our tallies. And we've already answered this question, but how many times is P1 critical? Twice there. P2 also twice. P3 also twice. Sometimes on tests, people stop there. Those people lose points. What do we do after we have the numbers there? Remember, we turned them into fractions. Just like last class, we need to turn these guys into fractions. Divided by 6. Why 6? All of them added together. There were 6 critical players altogether. So we divide everything by 6. You can leave it like this. You can change it to 1/3. You can change it to 33.3%. Whatever you want is fine. This is full credit. Changing it is also full credit. But certainly it sure feels like they're equal in power looking at those numbers. Okay, so the process we just detailed is written out here in number 5. We're not going to read it, but part C is the last piece of this puzzle, is that you count the total number of times each player is critical, and then you divide by, as Zeke says, the total number of times anybody was critical. Okay, who's our reader now? 6, Megan? Okay, so take a real quick peek right now at pages 7 and 8 in the packet. Just go all the way back to page 7 and page 8. And on 7 and 8, you will see the entire procedure written out, and you'll have that with you when you take this test in October. But you got to make sure you do some practicing beforehand. Don't rely on reading this thing and figuring it all out during the test, okay? But you will have that in front of you. Okay, 7 says calculate the BPI, bonds off power index. For Icelandia, we actually just did that. That's the 2/6, all that stuff over there. Okay, Zeke, you're going to rip it out and bring it to the test. Don't rip it out today. You're going to make a reference sheet of your own creation, and you're going to bring that, and you're going to bring in pages 7 and 8. Yes. All right, let's go to the next page, and we'll try this again. Number 8, Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. So part A, we're trying to write this voting system mathematically. Okay, so again, we'll start with our friends, the square brackets. First number is the quota. In this case, it's not written explicitly, so we have to calculate. We're looking for a simple majority. Zeke says 6. Other ideas? Agree or disagree? Yeah, is it 6? How many votes altogether? 10. Majority means more than half, right? So more than 5 in this case. 6 is good. And then we list them in order. So what number goes first? 4 is the coach, and then 3 for the GM. Scouting gets 2. And then the psychiatrist gets 1. Okay, so let's try to find the Banzhaf power distribution for this voting system. Okay, just like before, P1, P2, P3, and P4. Now this first step in the process means you have to come up with a list of all the winning coalitions, all the different ways there are to grab any number of those 4 people and have enough votes to pass. We need at least 6. So for example, can any single player get you, can any single one of these folks get you there? No. Are there any pairs that will get you there? Yeah, you can see the 4 and the 3 is at least 6. The 4 and the 2 is at least 6. Are there any other pairs that will get you to 6? No, but you can see that it's kind of, I don't want to say complicated, but it's very detail oriented, this process of finding all the winning coalitions, because you have to do a lot of juggling in your head with the numbers. They're not big numbers, but it's a lot to keep track of. So if you are still back anywhere near page 7 or 8, you don't need to go back there now. But I'll show you that on this page that you'll have with you on the test is a list right here of all the coalitions with 3 players. How many do we have in this example? 4 players, okay. So then right down here is a list of all the coalitions with 4 players. All the coalitions, not the winning ones, but all of them. Every possible way to grab some of those 4 people is listed here. And so if you want an orderly process to go through to make sure you get every single winning coalition, you follow this list one at a time. The first column is all the single players. Were there any single players that had enough votes to pass? No. So these guys are gone. I don't think you need to write on this. You're going to bring this to the test. But I'm telling you, you have it that you can have in front of you. And then we can look at the pairs, P1 and P2. All right, so I'll put it here so we still have it. What was it, 6? Okay, so P1 and P2, is that a winning coalition? Yes, so that one's good. P1 and P3? Yes. P1 and P4? No. P2 and P3? No, and I think we decided we had found all the pairs of winning players. And then we look at the trios and see which, if any of them, are winning. So P1, 2, and 3. If you add the first 3 players, is that enough? That's plenty. P1, 2, and 4. That's also enough. P1, 3, and 4. That's fine. 2, 3, and 4. That's 3 plus 2 plus 1 is exactly 6, which just enough. So it turns out any trio is enough. But it's really easy to miss these if you're just listing them from a blank sheet of paper. So feel free to have this in front of you on the homework. And then finally, if you have everybody voting, that's more than enough votes, okay? So on that blank spot you have in front of you on page 41, your job is to just write out these 7 coalitions. Just list them just like you see here. And then we're going to find the critical players, which is the hardest part. But I don't want to gloss over this step of finding the winning coalitions. So just copy all 7 of those just like you see, and then we'll talk about the winning coalitions. Okay, so how about instead of doing this as an entire class, you guys work in your groups right now. See if you can circle or rewrite someplace the critical players in each one of these coalitions. And I'll walk around and help out. We'll get the numbers up here so we can check our answers in a minute. But work with your table mates. See if you can find out which players, if any, are critical in each of those 7 winning coalitions. Okay, can we try this together? I need your help because I don't have the list in front of me. So it was, we had P1 with P2, P1 with P3, right? And then the trios that we had were which ones? And then 1, 2, and 4. 1, P3, P4. And then we also had P2, 3, and 4, right? And then everybody. Okay. All right. So everybody come on back. I appreciate that you are still figuring things out with your neighbors, but let's come back together and get these answers to agree with each other. Okay. There is no shortcut for finding which players are critical. You literally have to go through every player one at a time in every winning coalition. Okay, so we start at the beginning. Sometimes there are shortcuts, but this is the first time we're seeing it, so be patient with yourselves as you figure this out. So in the very first coalition, I'm temporarily putting my finger over P1. Is P2 by herself enough to pass this thing? No, which means P1 is critical. If P2 disappeared, does P1 have enough? No, so they're both critical here. So either write them again or circle them. Some people are circling like we underlined last class. And somebody had said something about pairs. Monica, can you say what you said about the pairs? Why? Yeah, right. It doesn't matter who's left over. If there's a single person left over, it's not enough, which means in every one of these pairs, everybody's critical. Zeke.
In this situation, we didn't have any quota.
Yeah, so if that single player has more than the quota, they'd be critical, and presumably they'd be critical in every single coalition. What is that player called if somebody has more than the quota? Dictator. What percentage of the power do you think they'll have? It is over 51. If they're a dictator, how much power do they have? All of it. So what would happen is you'd be circling P1 every time, and you'd never circle anybody else. And so we'd get 100% for the dictator. But yeah, they would be critical. Okay, things get stickier when you have 3 people. So let's take a look at P1, P2, and P3. Again, there's no shortcut. One at a time, we got to look at these players. So with your finger, cover up P1 and ask if what's left over is enough to win. And you got to go back to the original, our standard notation here to decide. So 2 and 3, do they have enough to win? No, they have only 5 votes. So what does that make P1 critical? So we circle P1. And then we do the same thing, just moving on down the line. P1 is back in play and P2 is temporarily crossed off. P1 and P3, do they have enough votes? How many do they have? They have 6, is that enough? Yes, so what does that mean about P2? Not critical. That's it, so they don't get circled, right? They're not all that important. P2 could go away, that coalition would still be a winning one. Move on to P3, temporarily cross off. P1 with P2, how much weight? Enough, 7, right? So what does that mean about P3? Not critical. Okay, and we keep going down the line. P1, P2, and P4. So I think we find that P1 is critical in that one again, right? What about P2? Let's look at that one. If we cross off P2, how much weight do those 2 people have left over? Not enough, right? They have only 5. So what does that mean about P2? It's critical. And so you can see you can't even just like jump to some conclusion that it's like, oh, we're just going to be circling all the P1s, and oh, we didn't circle P2 here, so we're never going to be circling P2, and it's just not true. You just have to go one at a time and look carefully at all the numbers. Do you guys remember, I think it was the very first class of the semester when we talked about the Borda method for counting votes, right? Like 1 point for last place, 2 for next, 3 for next. Was it hard? I said, I think this is what I said on that first day. It's not hard, but there's a lot of details. I'm going to say details. There's a lot of details. This isn't hard, but you got to be patient. It gets easier, I promise. Okay, let's look at P4. I don't know. All right, so if we look at P4, cross them off, what do we think about P1 with P2? It's fine. So what does that mean about P4? Not critical? That's fine. I'm going to give you guys another way to think about this. Is there a way we can cross off P4 and decide whether or not P1, P2 has enough without looking back at the numbers? Let's look at the pairs. P1 with P2, is it listed as a winning coalition? It is. So that means that P4 wasn't needed there. But if we had done this, P1, P4 isn't listed, which means it's not winning, right? You have a complete list of all the winning coalitions. So you can kind of remove yourself from a lot of the like little nitpicky arithmetic if you look at your list and understand what it represents. Okay, P1, P3, and P4. I guess we need, let's see, I guess we got to have P1 there. If we put our hand over that, we're left with P1 and P4. Is that in the list? No, which means we really needed P3. If we put our hand over P4, is that in the list? It is, so P4 not needed. I know Sam is with me. Are the rest of us with me? If you cover P4, you're left with P1 and P3, which you can see from up above is winning. So we didn't really need P4 there. How about P2, 3, and 4? How much weight did they have all together? P2, P3, and P4? They had 6. What can you say about that 6 compared to the quota? It's exact, right? So P2, 3, and 4 barely make it happen. They make it happen, but just barely. Which means if you get rid of any of them, they're going to lose. So what does that mean about the criticality of these players? They're all critical. And so I'm just kind of giving you some of these little shortcuts, not because I think you should be using them necessarily, but that if you think it's very tedious, sometimes you can really kind of logically save yourself some time if you just think about what's going on with the numbers. And then finally, P1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, here's a different kind of shortcut. Take a look at our trios. We had 1, 2, 3, and 4 winning trios, right? In fact, that's every possible trio. They were all winning, right? There's no other trios that we haven't listed. Agree? Which means that any trio is enough to win, yes? So what does that mean about this quad? If you get rid of one person, what are you left with? You're left with enough. Do you see that? None of them are critical, right? You can get rid of any one of those players and you're left with a trio, and we've already seen every single trio wins. So nobody's really critical in that one, right? So we don't circle anybody. Okay, now it's time to make our fractions. Okay, how many times is P1 circled here? 5 there, good. P2? 3. P3 is 3, and P4 just once. Again, I caution you on the test, don't stop there. These power indices are fractions or percentages. So you got to get me to fractions at least. We divide by, there's no magic number here. You literally have to count how many critical players there are. 12? Yep. So that's the index right there. Maybe this one we will go to percentages just so we can really talk about it intelligently. 5/12, how much is that? Somebody grab a calculator for me and type that in. Say again, Sarah? Okay, so we'll say about 41.7%. 3/12 is a quarter, so that's 25%. 25%, and then finally, Sarah, 1/12. So about 8.3% there. So this is the distribution of power in the Celtics system. Is it fair? I don't know, that's what management is supposed to decide, but they should at least have the facts, right? What do you think they intended in terms of who's more powerful when they gave the manager 3 votes and the scouting person 2? What do you think they meant to happen? They meant for the manager to have more power, right? They gave the manager 3 votes and only 2 for the director of scouting. In reality, what can you say about the power for manager and scout? They're equal. So the Celtics organization probably didn't intend that and might need to update their votes, right? And this is the kind of surprising information that you get when you actually go through the calculations. Okay. Good, good, good. All right, last thing, and then it's time for the group activity. So the last thing here is, as Sam points out, it can be kind of tedious or time consuming to go through these calculations. Fortunately, technology can do this stuff a lot faster than we can. There's a web page here that you can pull up and check out later on. I was ready to do it today, but unfortunately, there's a Java plugin that I do not have the authority to install on this machine. So this stuff right here would normally just look like a blank grid. You type in the players, you type in their weights, you click a button, 1/10 of a second later, it spits out the answers that we just got. And so it's kind of nice to have this. What's that? You think I'm going to show this to you at the beginning of class? So it's out there, just so you know that if there are a lot of players, you probably don't want to do it by hand. You might want to use the technology. Okay, last thing, and then the group activity on the next page. Zeke, can you read 10, please? Okay, so you don't need to go here now, but on page 3, you will see on the right-hand side some alphabet copies. You need to cut 2 cutouts between now and Wednesday. I'll bring in a pair of scissors because some of you are going to forget. But for the record, you all are aware right now that you need to get some scissors. And you need to make 2 cutouts. One of them is just the standard alphabet. That's here on the left. The other one is 2 copies of the alphabet. And don't cut that in half. That is one giant cutout you're going to bring with 2 copies on one piece of paper. Okay? All right, so the activity starts on the next page. Is it 42? It's enthusiasm. How can you? Oh, all right. Okay, so go to the next page, see if you can work through the activity and raise a flag if I can help.